You're not in the will anymore, Lenny. Robert changed his mind. That's what the attorney told me across his desk. No hesitation, no sympathy, just flat words that knocked the air out of me. Changed his mind? Robert had promised me that house, had written it down, had looked me in the eye more times than I could count and said, "This place will be yours someday." And now I was hearing I was out. Just like that. I sat there staring at the folder he slid across the table. My name was gone from every page. Replaced neatly with Eleanor, Robert's widow, and Charles, his son. "They've assumed full ownership," the attorney added, his eyes flicking down like he didn't want to meet mine. I felt my face heat. That wasn't just a technicality. That house wasn't a line item on a balance sheet. It was my home. I'd lived there for over a decade, sanding its floors, patching its shutters, cataloging Robert's old letters late into the night. I'd poured myself into that place because he'd trusted me with it. Because he'd said it mattered that I keep it alive. And now? I was the wrong heir. Let me back up. My name's Lenny Hayes. I'm 41, and I restore antique books in Charleston. Most people in town know me as the book guy. My shop smells like leather and dust, and half the time I've got ink on my hands. My life was steady, quiet. Mornings with coffee and paper, evenings on the porch of Robert's house with a glass of bourbon. Not glamorous, but it was mine. Robert was part of that rhythm. He wasn't family by blood, he was closer. He'd show up at the shop, lean on the counter, and ask what I was working on. He'd hand me an old book to restore, or slip me a story about Charleston in the 60s. He wasn't flashy, but he kept his word. And when he told me, more than once, "Kid, this house will be yours someday," I believed him. He'd already treated me like family when no one else had. But Eleanor, his widow, never hid her feelings. She treated me like I was an intruder, polite smiles at holidays, cold looks when Robert wasn't watching. And Charles? He'd smirk across the table and say things like, "Funny how much time you spend here, Lenny. Guess you really made yourself at home." Robert would shut him down, but those little comments stuck with me. The first time it hit me in public, it stung worse than I expected. A week after Robert's funeral, I stopped by the house to pick up some letters I'd promised to archive. Eleanor opened the door just a crack. "This isn't your house anymore, Leonard," she said, her voice sharp. "Charles and I will decide what happens to the property. It's time you found somewhere else to go." Her words weren't quiet, the neighbors walking their dog paused and looked right at me. I felt my throat close. I just mowed that lawn a week earlier, painted those steps last summer, fixed the railing with my own hands. And here I was, being dismissed on the very porch I'd cared for. I walked away that day feeling like my chest was hollow. Still, some part of me clung to the idea it was grief. Maybe they were lashing out, maybe the paperwork had gotten tangled. Robert's intentions were clear. Weren't they? That illusion shattered the night I spread the estate papers across my kitchen table. At first, I just saw what I already knew, my name was gone. But then, deeper in the stack, my stomach dropped. My signature. Page after page, there it was. My name, written in black ink, neat, smooth. But not mine. The curves were too clean, the loops too deliberate. Someone had forged me. They hadn't just erased me from Robert's will. They'd used my own handwriting to shut me out. I sat there frozen, staring at the ink, my hands shaking. For a second I even doubted myself. Had I signed something I forgot? No. I knew my hand. And this wasn't it. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't grief, or paperwork, or miscommunication. This was deliberate theft. Eleanor and Charles hadn't just pushed me aside, they'd stolen my place and dressed it up in false signatures. And right then, as the streetlight outside flickered across those papers, I knew something with absolute certainty. They thought I'd take this quietly. They thought I'd walk away. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The first time people noticed my absence was at the Preservation Society luncheon, and they noticed it loudly. My name card sat untouched at the long white table, and Mrs. Langley, who had introduced me to Robert years ago, leaned over to whisper, "Where's Lenny?" I wasn't there to hear it, but I heard the story repeated enough afterward that I could picture it perfectly. The chair sat empty while Charles raised his glass in front of donors, smiling as if that absence was his victory. Someone told me he even said, "Not everyone can carry on a legacy. Some people just drift away." He said it with that smug little tilt to his head, the same one he used at Christmas dinners when he'd try to make me look small. The room laughed politely. They believed him. And my silence sealed their picture: Lenny Hayes, forgotten, finished. That was fine with me. Quiet was a mask, and I wore it well. I spent longer hours in my shop, cataloging brittle ledgers, gluing leather spines, and acting as if the outside world had shrunk to nothing but ink and paper. When customers asked if I'd be at the next society meeting, I shook my head. Not this year. Too busy. When neighbors asked about the house, I smiled faintly and said, "It's in good hands now." Every word was designed to confirm the story Eleanor and Charles wanted told, that I had surrendered. But in Charleston, gossip doesn't just trickle, it seeps into every corner. Soon I heard of the parties being held at the house, my house, Robert's house, where Eleanor swept through rooms in new gowns, and Charles puffed cigars on the porch. They brought in a decorator to strip the study I had spent years restoring, replacing walnut shelves with sleek glass and steel. Someone described it to me as modern chic, but the way they said it carried the sting of pity, as if they knew Robert would have hated it. And when neighbors stopped by my shop, they carried little fragments of the story like breadcrumbs, leaving me to sweep them up silently. I will never forget one night when I stood across the street from the house, half hidden beneath the shadow of a magnolia tree. The windows glowed bright, and music spilled into the yard. Through the glass I could see Eleanor laughing, her hand heavy with jewelry Robert never would have bought her, while Charles leaned against the mantel with a drink, telling stories. His voice carried across the lawn. "Father always said I'd inherit it. People thought he might split things, but of course he came to his senses." The crowd chuckled, glasses clinking, and I stayed in the dark with my fists in my pockets. Then I saw it, Charles sliding a manila folder into the sideboard when he thought no one was watching. Quick, careless. Something worth hiding. While they flourished, I made myself look small, but I was moving beneath the surface. I started therapy under the pretense of needing closure. My therapist, Dr. Morris, listened patiently as I described betrayal in vague strokes. One afternoon she tilted her head and said, "You don't strike me as a man who gives up easily. What are you waiting for?" I smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes the best move is no move at all." She studied me but didn't press. That was what I needed, a quiet record of my steadiness, proof that I was not unraveling but planning. I also went back to the gym. At first it was just to sweat out the anger that clung to me, but soon it became something else. I noticed Charles there one afternoon, strutting between machines, talking loudly to a friend about the burden of managing an estate. He saw me and smirked. "Didn't expect to see you here, Hayes. Thought you'd be buried under books." I kept my voice steady. "Just keeping myself in shape. Restoration work is heavier than it looks." He laughed, slapping his friend's shoulder as if I had delivered a punchline. But I saw the flicker of unease when I kept eye contact longer than he liked. It was small, but it was there. Even my wardrobe changed, little by little. Gone were the worn flannels and frayed cuffs. I started wearing pressed shirts, a tailored jacket or two. Nothing ostentatious, but enough for people to notice. One evening Mrs. Langley returned to the shop and raised her eyebrows. "My, don't you look different? New chapter for you?" I smiled politely. Something like that. She didn't know it, but that comment was worth more to me than sympathy. It meant others were seeing subtle shifts, even if they didn't understand their meaning. Still, Eleanor wasn't finished humiliating me. The worst came on a warm Saturday afternoon when I ran into her outside a cafe downtown. She was flanked by two friends in pastel jackets, all of them sipping sparkling water and gossiping loudly. She spotted me before I could cross the street and called out, "Leonard. How quaint to see you here. Still running your little shop?" Her friends laughed softly, like trained birds. "It must be difficult, managing without a real home. You've always been good at making do." The words were sugar-coated poison, pitched just loud enough for the sidewalk crowd to hear. I smiled faintly, nodding once. "Enjoy your afternoon, Eleanor." Then I walked away, her laughter chasing me down the block. It stung, of course it stung, but it also hardened something inside me. Each insult, each dismissal, was another brick in the wall I was quietly building. By now, everyone thought I was fading. I didn't challenge them in public, didn't appear at events, didn't even comment when the newspaper published a feature on the new stewards of the Hayes house. I clipped the article, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer. Silence was my mask, but beneath it I was laying out threads. I began reconnecting with Robert's old colleagues, historians, archivists, neighbors who had been present at dinners where Robert spoke of his intentions. I didn't tell them the whole truth. I didn't need to. I only needed to remind them of the man Robert had been, the promises he had made. Seeds, planted quietly. The last encounter with Eleanor before everything began to shift happened in the grocery store, of all places. I had a basket of apples and bread. She had a cart overflowing with imported cheeses and bottles of wine. She spotted me and rolled closer, her smile brittle. "Lenny," she said smoothly, "I do hope you're managing. We're redecorating Robert's study this week, clearing out those old books you cluttered it with. It's refreshing, really. Some things need to be swept away so progress can happen. Don't you agree?" Her voice carried, sharp enough that two shoppers nearby glanced up. She wanted the humiliation to be public, casual, unforgettable. I set the basket down carefully and met her eyes. My voice was steady, deliberate. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Her smile froze for half a second before she forced a laugh. "Oh, Leonard, still dramatic," she said, pushing her cart away. But I saw it. The flicker in her eyes, the small pause before she regained her composure. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing something beneath the words. I left the store with nothing but apples in my bag, but with a certainty heavy enough to anchor me. She thought I was defeated. She thought I was still the caretaker she could mock in public. She thought I was erased. She had no idea what was coming. The crack I had been waiting for came on a Tuesday evening, when I was sweeping the shop floor and thinking only about closing up. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, and against my better judgment I answered. "Charles," a man said in a clipped voice, "we need to move those funds before the audit. I told you the bank's already sniffing around. If the wire doesn't clear by morning, it's going to get flagged." For a moment I said nothing, my broom frozen midair. Then I lowered my voice and replied, "This isn't Charles." There was a sharp intake of breath, a muttered curse, and the line went dead. I stood there in the quiet, the broom bristles pressing against the floorboards, my pulse pounding in my throat. A wrong number is one thing. A wrong number calling me Charles and talking about shifting funds before an audit was something else entirely. It told me more than I had guessed. Charles wasn't just arrogant, he was sloppy. And if he was sloppy with strangers, he would eventually be sloppy where it mattered most. I locked up the shop early and sat at my kitchen table with my notebook. I wrote the call down word for word, hearing the man's tone replay in my head. That night, sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the worst: Charles dabbling in shady transfers, Eleanor pretending ignorance, both of them wrapping themselves tighter in lies. The call had given me what I needed, not evidence yet, but a direction. From that moment on, I stopped drifting through days like a man beaten. I became a listener, a watcher, a collector. At the gym, I overheard Charles bragging to a friend about how managing an estate was like running a company. So many moving parts, he said loudly, as if half the room needed to know. Father almost left it to someone who didn't have the head for it. Imagine the disaster. His friend laughed obligingly, but when Charles turned, he caught me on the treadmill behind him. "Oh look," he sneered, "the bookbinder himself. Do you even know what an estate audit is, Lenny?" I wiped my brow and met his eyes calmly. "I know audits find things people try to hide." The smirk faltered for a heartbeat before he barked a laugh. "Careful, Hayes, you'll start sounding bitter." But I could tell the line had hit closer than he liked. Not long after, I stopped by the church where Robert had once been an active member. Eleanor was in the vestibule with her circle of friends, her voice carrying with deliberate sweetness. "Robert entrusted me with everything," she cooed. It was his last wish that Charles and I protect the home. One woman asked gently, "Did he write that down?" Eleanor's smile wavered just slightly before she said, "Oh, nothing formal. Just our private conversations." I caught the hesitation, the tiniest crack, and though I said nothing, I felt my jaw tighten. Even lies leave fingerprints. I began weaving the record carefully. I copied Robert's old letters, some where he had written things like, "Lenny understands this house better than anyone else," and, "He will keep it alive when I no longer can." I photographed receipts that still bore my name, the wood I bought for the porch, the paint for the shutters, the hardware for the study shelves. I noted comments from neighbors who remembered me tending the lawn, cataloging the library, restoring the desk Robert used to write at. Each page in my growing binder was like a stitch in a binding, invisible until the whole book held together. But collecting paper wasn't enough. I needed voices, too. One afternoon I invited Lydia, the historian who had corresponded with Robert, for tea at the shop. She set her cup down gently and said, "You know, Robert often called you the son he never had. I assumed, of course, the house would go to you. When I heard otherwise, it was confusing." I asked if she still had his letters. She nodded slowly. "I do. If they can help set the record straight, they're yours." Her voice was kind but firm. "Robert's wishes matter, Lenny. Don't let anyone tell you different." Another ally appeared in the form of David, a lawyer whose family Bible I had once restored. Over coffee I asked him what someone could do if they suspected a will had been tampered with. He raised his eyebrows. "If you're asking me, I assume this isn't a hypothetical. The key is proof, handwriting, witnesses, contemporaneous records. A court won't overturn words lightly, but forgery? That changes everything." He leaned closer. "Be careful, though. When families commit fraud, they protect it viciously." Meanwhile, Eleanor and Charles were at the height of their performance. They posed for photos in the paper, standing on the porch of the house I had lived in, all smiles and pearls. Charles gave interviews about honoring tradition and modernizing the collection. He even hosted a dinner where he gave a speech about correcting mistakes his father almost made. The house was nearly lost to someone without the capacity to carry it, he said, glass raised. Fortunately, family prevailed. Guests clapped politely. Later, one woman whispered to me in the shop, it felt like he was bragging more than honoring. I smiled faintly. "Some people mistake arrogance for legacy," I replied. Still, I wanted something sharper, something undeniable. And it arrived in a way I hadn't expected. It was late one night when I returned to the shop and found an envelope slipped under the door. No name. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a letter in Robert's unmistakable handwriting, dated just 6 months before he passed. "Lenny has kept this home alive," it read. "It belongs with him when I am gone. That is my wish, and I trust it will be respected." My hands shook as I read the words. The letter smelled faintly of dust and old ink, as if whoever had kept it had done so carefully. But why give it to me now? And who? The mystery unsettled me as much as it strengthened me. Someone out there believed in Robert's true intentions, and someone was brave enough to slip proof into my hands when the risk of being caught was real. For days after, I couldn't shake the image of Eleanor's friends, of Charles's careless smirk, of the man on the phone talking about audits. Threads were converging, pulling tight. The almost confrontation came at the gym. Charles swaggered in with his usual entourage, spotting me by the weights. He strode over, smirking. "You're still here, Hayes. I half expected you to crawl back into whatever hole you came from. You know Father almost ruined everything by even considering you, right?" He was sentimental at the end. "Thank God Mother and I said it straight." His words were loud enough to draw glances from others nearby. I set down the dumbbell slowly, my breathing calm. "Funny thing about records, Charles," I said evenly. "They don't forget. They don't rewrite themselves, no matter how hard someone tries." For the first time, I saw his smirk falter into something close to anger. His friend laughed nervously, tugging at Charles's arm. "Come on, man." Charles forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. That was the moment I knew, he feared something, even if he didn't know what. By the time the charity gala rolled around, my binder was thick with letters, receipts, testimonies, and now the mysterious photocopy. I had allies who trusted me quietly, a lawyer ready to advise, and patience that no amount of Eleanor's smugness could erode. The gala was their showpiece, the event meant to crown their triumph. Eleanor swept through the room in a glittering gown, Charles beside her in a tuxedo. I lingered near the back, listening as they greeted donors, laughing too loudly, their words dripping with performance. At one point Eleanor spotted me and approached with Charles in tow, her smile gleaming like a knife. "Leonard," she said, her voice carrying just enough for people nearby to hear, "I am amazed you still attend these things. I'd think it too painful, given, well, everything. Surely you have better places to be." Charles chuckled darkly. "He doesn't know when he's beaten." I looked at them both, steady as stone, and let the words fall softly, meant only for them though others leaned closer to catch them. "The funny thing about being beaten," I said, "is that sometimes it's only the first act." Charles's laugh came too loud, too forced. Eleanor tugged his sleeve, her smile stretched a little too tight, and they turned quickly to greet someone else. But I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the tremor in her voice when she said, "Darling," too quickly. I left the gala without another word, the echo of my own calm voice in my ears. They thought they were untouchable, shining in their false victory. They had no idea how close the ground beneath them was to breaking open. They thought the evening was theirs. Eleanor and Charles had dressed for a coronation, not a reckoning. The town hall was strung with banners about heritage and legacy, the local paper had reserved seats up front, and the Preservation Society members filled the rows with polite smiles. The air was thick with perfume, self-importance, and the certainty that the Hayes legacy now belonged to Eleanor and her son. I sat near the back, binder heavy in my lap, calm on the outside while my pulse drummed steadily in my chest. I'd waited too long, stitched too many pieces together, to stumble now. Tonight wasn't just another party for them, it was the stage they had built for themselves, and I intended to let them choke on it. Eleanor was first at the podium, her voice smooth as velvet. "Friends, thank you for joining us to celebrate Robert's memory and the continuation of his work through his family." She gestured toward Charles with pride. "He loved this house, and he trusted us to carry it into the future." Polite applause followed. Then Charles stepped forward, puffing his chest like a rooster. "Father nearly made a terrible mistake," he declared. "He was sentimental at the end, ready to hand the estate to someone without the vision to manage it. But he came to his senses, and family honor prevailed." He paused for laughter, but it came awkwardly, scattered, like people weren't sure if they were meant to laugh at a funeral memory. His jaw tightened, but he kept going. "We'll modernize, expand, bring in designers, make it shine like it never has before. A murmur rippled through the historians, their faces stiff. Eleanor stepped beside him, smiling brightly. "It is our sacred duty," she said, "and we thank you for your trust." And that was my cue. I stood. My chair scraped against the floor, echoing louder than I expected. "Before you close the evening," I said, my voice steady, "I think Robert deserves to have his actual wishes heard." The room went quiet. Dozens of heads turned. Eleanor's smile froze, and Charles leaned forward over the podium, his eyes narrowing. "Sit down, Lenny," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "No," I replied, walking down the aisle, binder in hand. "You invited the community here. You invited the press. You wanted a celebration of Robert's legacy. Let's make sure it's celebrated truthfully." Gasps murmured through the crowd. Eleanor hissed, "This is inappropriate." "Inappropriate," I repeated, setting my binder on the podium with a thud, "is forging a man's will and pretending it was his choice." The room erupted in whispers. Eleanor paled, and Charles barked out a laugh, too loud, too forced. "Ridiculous. You're bitter because father didn't choose you. That's all this is." I opened the binder and lifted the first letter. 5 years before he died, Robert wrote to me. His handwriting, his words, "You are the son I never had. This house belongs with you." I held it high so the audience could see the ink. Murmurs rippled. Lydia, sitting in the front row, nodded firmly, her eyes bright. "Old letters don't matter," Charles scoffed. "People change their minds." "Then explain this," I said, flipping to one of the estate documents and holding it up. "My name. My signature. Except it isn't my hand. I never signed these pages. Someone forged me." Gasps turned into sharp cries. One of the lawyers in attendance, David, who had reviewed them for me, stood. "I can confirm the inconsistency," he said, his voice ringing clear. "Those signatures are not Mr. Hayes's. Forgery is a crime." The reporter's pen scratched furiously. Eleanor grabbed Charles's arm. "Don't listen to this nonsense," she pleaded to the crowd. "He's desperate, clinging to scraps." "Scraps?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I lived in that house for over a decade. I repaired the shutters, restored the shelves, catalogued the library. And I have receipts, in my name, for every supply I bought. Paint. Wood. Tools. Ask the hardware store if you doubt me." I pulled out copies, spreading them across the podium like cards on a table. "Does this look like scraps?" A neighbor in the crowd called out, "I saw him fixing those steps myself." Another chimed in, "Robert told me Lenny was the only one who cared about the house." The voices spread, louder now, a tide turning against the stage. Charles slammed the podium with his palm. "You're pathetic. Living off father's pity, pretending you mattered. You were nothing but a caretaker." That outburst was his undoing. The room gasped, some shaking their heads, others glaring. Eleanor tugged at his sleeve, hissing, "Stop, stop." And then I pulled the last piece. The photocopy of Robert's final letter, the one that had been slipped under my shop door. I held it up with both hands, my voice steady but hard. 6 months before his death, Robert wrote this, "Lenny has kept this home alive. It belongs with him when I am gone. That is my wish." The room exploded. People gasped, some stood, voices rose all at once. Eleanor lunged toward me, her hand outstretched. "That's a fake. He's lying," she shrieked. I pulled it back and said firmly, "Touch it, and you'll answer for destroying evidence in front of half of Charleston." Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, pens scratching. Lydia stood and declared, "I have letters too. Robert wrote me the same sentiments. I will testify." Others followed, neighbors, colleagues, each adding their memories of Robert praising me, promising the house, dismissing Eleanor's claim. Eleanor's mask cracked entirely, her voice shrill. Robert was confused at the end. He didn't know what he wanted. That line silenced the room like a gunshot. Gasps turned into horrified stares. Even her allies shifted uncomfortably. Suggesting Robert had been confused was the same as admitting his last wishes were unreliable, including the ones she claimed gave her the house. I closed the binder slowly, letting the silence stretch. "This isn't about money," I said quietly, though the whole room hung on the words. "It's about honoring the man who gave me a home when no one else would. You can try to erase me, but you can't erase his own handwriting. His own words. His own legacy." The applause began hesitantly, then swelled until it filled the hall. Reporters crowded closer. Eleanor stood frozen, pale and trembling. Charles muttered under his breath, face red, then stormed from the podium, shoving past the crowd. Eleanor followed, her shoes clicking too fast against the wood, chased by cameras and murmurs of disgrace. The fallout was immediate. The story ran the next morning: forgery allegations rock Hayes' estate. The regional magazine picked it up. Lawyers began their work, and within weeks, a judge froze the estate. When the case reached the courtroom, the evidence was undeniable: the forged signatures, the receipts, the letters, the testimonies. Eleanor and Charles's protests only dug them deeper, their lies collapsing under the weight of proof. The judge ruled in my favor. The house returned to me. But the legal ruling was almost anticlimactic compared to the social collapse. People who had once clinked glasses with Eleanor crossed the street to avoid her. Donors pulled out of her projects. Charles, who had strutted around the gym bragging about his inheritance, found himself working off debts to pay legal fees, his bravado shriveled to silence. Reporters printed their downfall in stark headlines. The day I walked back into Robert's house, the keys heavy in my palm, I felt no triumph, only a deep calm. The sleek furniture they had installed still cluttered the rooms, but the bones of the house, the shelves, the windows, the porch I had painted, were still mine. I walked into Robert's study, opened the window, and let the light spill in. It smelled of dust and old paper, the way it had the first time I ever walked inside years ago. I sat at Robert's desk and placed the binder on its surface. Page after page of proof, of patience, of voices that had joined mine. It wasn't just my victory. It was Robert's truth restored, his legacy protected, his voice heard again. Eleanor and Charles thought they could write me out. They thought a forged signature and a smile would erase me. They thought I would fade quietly. Instead, the whole town watched them unravel. And as for me? I got the house, I got my name back, and I gave Robert the one thing he asked for: someone to keep it alive. They thought they could bury me under paper. All they did was hand me the ink.